Welcome to episode 112 of the Lowdown Radio Show presented by advrider.com. I'm Neil Graham. I'm perplexed by many things in life, but none more than this. When I buy a pack of sweet Caporal cigarettes from old Mrs. Harrison down at the general store, she doesn't charge a separate fee for handing them to me off the shelf, or indeed for having them shipped to her store. And yet when I buy a motorcycle, the price on the manufacturer's website isn't what I pay at the dealership because I then have to pay for shipping and setup as separate line items. Why isn't there just one price? The National Powersports Dealers Association is lobbying for just this. But, alas, it's not as simple as it sounds. Longtime dealership man and NPDA board member Mark Sheffield joins me today to untangle the bizarre and byzantine pricing practices of the motorcycle industry. All this on this week's Lowdown Radio Show. Mark, before we get going in this topic about pricing, let's establish your bona fides. What's your background working in dealerships? What's your thumbnail sketch?
So in 1993, I got out of the military and on a Monday started working on a powersports dealership, small Yamaha dealership on a Tuesday. And I was employee number 4. Guy that came in early in the morning, built bikes, worked the parts counter in the afternoon, sold the occasional bike, and stayed late when we sold something to get it ready. And then left there, went and worked at Woods Fun Center in Austin, which was one of the larger dealers in the country at that point in time. And we were acquired in 99 by a consolidator called APS. Went and worked at APS for a couple of years doing acquisitions of dealers across the country. I think we acquired 8 in the 2.5 that I was there. Pretty much figured out that I was not a corporate kind of guy. And so left there after 2.5 years. I think that was in 2003, 2004. And went and managed a large Honda dealer in Houston for about 1.5 years. And then in 2006, we had the opportunity to buy a dealership there just north of San Antonio in New Braunfels, Texas. And I had never really wanted to be in that position. I was perfectly fine managing a parts department, but Mark Woods, who I'd worked with in the past, made me an offer and that I couldn't refuse. And so went to manage that store and did that for about 12 years. I really enjoyed the process of building the dealership up. I didn't enjoy the process of maintaining it once we got it to that level. And so in 2016, I semi-retired, still associated with the dealership, still do a lot of work for them, but also do some other work in the industry. So I'm on a couple of boards, dealer associations, one national, one in Texas. Somehow, oddly, I ended up as a board member on a public company, which still to this day amazes me that I was chosen for that. And then I do a little bit of consulting work in the industry, one with a large provider of websites. And then I also do some contract work with a large dealer group, kind of just helping them to refine their processes.
Now that we've established that you're not just a vagrant who managed to make it onto this podcast, although we've had many vagrants, you work with an organization called the, where is it here? The Powership Dealers Association, National Powership Dealers Association.
Correct. So
tell me what that is briefly, and then tell me what this new white paper that you've launched, what it's trying to address.
So the NPDA is the third attempt at a national dealer association, and they exist and have existed in auto for a long time, but power sports has never been able to put one together. And there's complexity in the U.S. because there's a need for this national organization that is going to represent dealers in discussions and talks with the manufacturers. But there's still a lot that needs to happen in the states at the state level. There are very few federal and national laws that impact all dealers. And so we kind of exist in this gray zone between the states and between the manufacturers. And Today, we have about 430 members. If you want to put that in context, and there are debates on this number, but there's somewhere between 3,800 and 4,800 franchise dealers across the country.
So you're
So
you're a decent chunk.
10%. We
10%.
would love to get to 1,000. That's really what we have continued to push for. We're making some inroads, and I think we're doing some good, but it's been a lot of work, and um, it's taken a little time for us to find our footing. But we're getting there, and we're getting to the point that we've got enough members now to where the manufacturers will actually look at us and talk to us and treat us like we are an actual representative of the dealer body. So they may not always like it, but we're getting there.
Well, this raises an interesting question for me because, as a very non-businessman myself, when I go in a dealership and I see all the inventory they have and all the staff, and there's a big dealership near me, and they've got 85 employees and 50,000 square feet and every imaginable brand except maybe the Russian brands. And I look at that and I break into a sweat. And then you hear on top of that, you hear about this what is often a combative relationship between OEMs and dealerships. And it's such a and this is kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's a bizarre relationship because, if you go to Home Depot, they sell Makita and DeWalt and Milwaukee and all these other brands, hundreds and hundreds of brands. But if you're a motorcycle dealer, now, of course, you'll have aftermarket stuff from various Tucker Rocky or Parts Unlimited or so on. You'll sell those parts. But by far the majority of your business, you're selling products from a single company or maybe two or three companies. And it seems like there is this constant battle between the OEMs trying to jam motorcycles down your throat and the dealers going, hang on, whoa, we can't sell that. Or we can't sell that quickly enough, or we don't have the floor space. So can you summarize in a nutshell what this relationship is like between dealers and OEMs?
I can't make a blanket statement because that really varies between different manufacturers. And at different times, those relationships can be good, and different times they can be strained. What is creating a lot of pressure today is the the OEMs are trying to insert themselves more into the dealer operations, which creates conflict. And
What
they,
does that mean? Insert themselves into dealer operations. Can you break that down?
yeah, we operate. Most dealers operate with what's called a DMS, our computer system, and manufacturers now are tying. Most manufacturers are tying a portion of the profitability that we make on the vehicles we sell to dealers allowing them certain access. And now the major vendors in the industry, they want access to our DMS. They want to be able to see what we're selling, when we're selling it, with very little control over what they have access to. And I've equated this many times to being arrested. And the phrase that I use with dealers is that anything that you share can and will be used against you. And to put that in context, if you're a dealer that's got 5 brands and you've got a couple of vendors who have access to your system and they see that you're selling more of somebody else's brand, or that maybe you're making a higher margin on their product than somebody else,
Mm.
then they have incentives to try and level up or do certain things to move the dealer in that direction. And so now, you know, they not only they want access to our DMS, they want access to our financials, they want access to our website. And where this is very problematic on the website front is, let's say that you're a Kawasaki dealer and a Polaris dealer and a BRP dealer. And you have a customer that comes to your website and they look at a Kawasaki and they go, that's the vehicle that I want to buy. And they submit a lead to the dealer on that. What if one of those other manufacturers has access to that lead and they go, well, this customer's looking for a Kawasaki. I've got a bike that's consistent with that. I'm going to start targeting that customer with offers. And maybe I'm even going to push that consumer to another dealer who has a better selection. And so, yeah, it's problematic.
Is it legal to do this?
That's a gray area. There's state and federal laws, but it doesn't exactly fit into any of the laws that exist today. I will tell you that you can go back to 2.5, 3 years ago. CDK was hacked, and all of
Sorry,
the
sorry. And CDK is what again?
CDK is a company that offers these computer systems primarily to auto dealers,
Okay.
and about 40% of dealers. And so when they were hacked and their systems went down, about 40% of automotive dealers in the country had to revert to paper contracts and handwriting everything and figuring out what customers owed them and where parts orders were. And a lot of dealers were down for 3 to 4 weeks. And, CDK has been hit by the federal government with fines and things like that. But what was not expected, but what is continuing to happen today, is that dealers are being sued for that hack. And the argument is that you as a dealer chose to do business with this company. You didn't do very good due diligence. And so
They're being sued by whom?
primarily with us, it's kind of class action lawsuits, but it can also be individuals if they want to. And essentially, they're saying that you entrusted my personal data with this company. They had a
Oh.
breach. And so now I'm going to sue you for, in some cases, lots of money, because you made a bad decision. And so we as dealers have very little uh, understanding about who has access to what in these relationships and how that data is being taken care of. And
So
so
for
it's
so let me jump in. So for instance, so say you have a dealership,
Mhm.
say you grant permission for the OEM to have the information that you have in terms of sales and so on. And then if the OEM gets hacked, you're potentially liable
Yes,
for the leak via the OEM.
yes.
This is not a good business to be in. Um, but is the problem not here that if you're a motorcycle dealer, you've only got a couple of brands, and you have to get along with that OEM because they can make your life living hell, I would think. I don't know, Polaris could send all its UTVs or whatever you call these things, side-by-sides to a dealer in Manhattan or something where, you're not going to sell a lot of them. I mean, it's a very precarious relationship. It's a bit like getting along with your ex-wife, I would think.
The the rules that govern what you're talking about vary by state. And so, there are some states where dealers maintain pretty significant control in the relationship. There are states where dealers have almost no control. And in fact, you being up in Canada, I mean, you have no franchise laws up there. If a dealer and a manufacturer get sideways, the manufacturer can just go, you know what? I'm going to set up another dealer a mile down the road. And there's nothing that you can do about that.
Really?
Yeah. That is typically not a problem here in the States. Again, it varies a little bit from state to state. But some states have pretty good protections in place to limit those kind of actions, because as a dealer, we've invested a lot in building a brand in a marketplace and supporting those customers, stocking those parts. And so there are some protections that exist, but again, it varies across the country. But, I think one of the best things that dealers ultimately can do is to have multiple brands, because there comes a point, and we are there with one of our vendors right now, where we just kind of had to put them in timeout and say, "You're not being a good partner. You're acting like a vendor, and so we're just going to put you over here in the corner, and we're not going to deter customers from buying your product, but we're also not going to put you front and center. And when you would like to re-enter the marriage and not be an ex-wife, then, we'll start doing some things that are going to work good for both of us. But we can do that because we have alternatives.
Yeah.
And if you're a single line dealer, if you've only got one brand, you have given up a lot of power."
There's much about the automotive and motorcycle pricing business that has always perplexed me. So say if I go around the corner to the gas station here and I want to get a pack of Lucky Strikes. I don't have to pay for them to put the cigarettes on the shelf or to prep the cigarettes for sale. There's a price, I pay the price. How much profit the dealer makes or the retailer isn't concerned to me. How much it costs to ship it from big tobacco doesn't really concern me, because I'm just interested in the final price. And it reminds me of something years ago, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit, but I did buy a Saturn car once. My brother worked for GM, got a good discount. The cars with the plastic body, remember them?
It was an easy process. It was a one price. Here's the price. No negotiation.
Exactly. They were a typical low quality GM product, at least at the time. GMs weren't so great, but they had the best pricing system. There was a price, like buying anything else. And I remember reading a survey about this, and a lot of women bought Saturns because they didn't want to go into a dealership and have to heckle about. And I don't know, but my wife is not a heckler. She'll just turn around and walk out. She does not want to negotiate. I kind of enjoy negotiating. I think it's fun. But further to that, now that we're talking about this whole notion of you go to a motorcycle, and this is kind of what we're talking about today. You go to a motorcycle website and you see you're $16,499. And then you go into a dealership, and of course that's not the price, because there are these add-ons, there's preparation, there's all these other things that need to be done to a bike. And then of course you're taxed on top of that, like any other product. So the tax isn't the issue. Why is there this absurd disconnect? And this is what your white paper is about, NPDA's white paper. Why isn't the price on the website for the OEM, why isn't that the price that we see in the dealership?
I'll be, very honest to come out and say this, that, I don't like the process. And, we've done a survey of dealers, and 90% of dealers don't like the process. But I'll explain how we got where we're at.
Please.
If you go back, and I did a little bit of research for this, and I looked up a few things just to make sure that I was in line. If you go back 20 years, most of the price sheets or the price list that we got from a manufacturer, would have, here's your dealer invoice price. You would get a small credit for prepping the vehicle for sale. You would have a freight cost that was on there. And then you would kind of get, here's the price that we're going to bill you when we send you that vehicle. And here's the retail price. And, for a long time, the amount of time that it took to prep a vehicle to get it ready, and the cost of labor back 20 years ago was a lot cheaper. It wasn't that big of a number. And the freight cost really wasn't that big of an issue. I mean, 20 years ago, dealers were sometimes paying $200 to get a full-size motorcycle shipped into them. And so, for a long time, the price was the price. MSRP was what the vehicle sold for, and those other costs were kind of absorbed by the dealer. There came to be a point, I would say probably in the mid 90s, where the freight charge began to be a number that could no longer be ignored. And so we went through this period of time where dealers started to present that freight cost to the customer and go, here's the selling price and here's the freight charge. And you can look at the price sheets. It was never designed, it was never intended for the freight cost to be something that dealers would absorb. And you can go and look at most manufacturers' websites today. They say, here's the selling price, here's a freight charge in tiny subscript below that. It wasn't a cost that was designed for dealers to eat. And there was that transition from probably the mid 90s to the mid 2000s where the majority of dealers started putting that number in front of customers and saying, here's an additional cost that you've got to pay. And, the automotive industry got this figured out a long time ago in the Maroney days. And now, when you look at the sticker on a car, it's got all of the features that you're paying for, it's got freight, and then there's the MSRP. And so we know it can be done. And I had an interesting conversation with an OEM the other day who said, we're interested in looking at this, but we don't want to be the first. And I said, perfect. You're not the first because BMW already does this and BMW has been doing this for a long time. So congratulations. We got that hurdle out of the way.
So, and so to clarify, so if I go to BMW Motorrad's website and the price on that bike is the price on the dealer floor?
Yes. There are a few exceptions there, but to explain what BMW does,
Please.
is that the MSRP includes the freight charge, and those bikes come in a crate. And some of them is a pretty considerable amount of time to assemble them, to get them ready, to put gas, to toss the crate. The dealer submits a warranty claim through the warranty system. It's not really a warranty claim, but that's the easiest and cleanest way to do it. And BMW reimburses the dealer for the cost of building and setting that bike up and making it ready for sale. And they are, in the power sports world, they are the only one who does that.
Who reimburses the dealer for putting it together?
Yes.
Why wouldn't they just charge less? Isn't it kind of just, if you have to, as the dealer, then claim that money back, wouldn't it just behoove BMW or any other brand just to charge them a little less? Or is that too straightforward?
I think, you're probably kind of 30 minutes into the future of this conversation. So let's go back to where we were in 2005.
Okay.
So now we've got dealers who are presenting a vehicle to a customer and then saying, okay, you've got this freight charge. Well, now we kind of get into the 2005 to where we're at today. And technicians are, in a lot of cases, tough for dealers to find. There's a lot of cost to train techs, to hire trained technicians. And the vehicles that we need to assemble and build are a lot more complex than they were back in the day. Back when I started doing this in 1993, I didn't really have any training whatsoever, but I could take the little 10-page manual and assemble a Virago 750, dating myself here, or an FZR 600. And, it was pretty easy. It was something that I could do. I don't think today that I could assemble a lot of the vehicles that we as a dealership sell because they're too complex. There's too much that goes into it, and I just don't think I would do a very good job. I'd miss something and put a customer at risk. And we've also got the liability situation that starts to arise. too many attorneys and too many people looking for money. And so dealers really need to have a paper trail that exists about, yes, this vehicle came in and we had a trained tech who put it together. We've got the documentation and the paperwork that shows that we did this the way that the manufacturer asked us to do it. And so as that cost started to increase for dealers, there came to be this point probably in the mid 2000s where dealers not only started to go, well, we've got this freight charge that is additional on the price, but now we got a setup cost. And that there's still some dealers in the country who don't have trained technicians putting their vehicles together. They've still got a kid making 22 bucks an hour who is assembling those vehicles. They're absorbing that cost in a different way in the dealership, and they're just not passing that on to the consumer. It's still a cost to the dealer, but it's accounted for in a different way in that dealer's financials. So how do we get from where we were to where we are? That's kind of the story on how we got to here's MSRP, here's freight, and here's setup. And here's a lot of customers who really don't like that process. And to be honest, a lot of dealers who really don't like that process either. But I went and looked up 10 years ago. I didn't pop my sheet up, but you know, Adventure Rider. Let's talk about the OG adventure bike, the KLR 650. 10 years ago, a KLR 650 cost me, I think it was $375 or $350 to get shipped from Japan to my dealership. Today, 2020, 2026, what year we're in, it was $675. That's an additional cost that's added on to my invoice. It's a number that today is too big to ignore. And your cat participated in your podcast. Now here comes mine. So today's Adventure Rider podcast is brought to you by Greenies. So made from all the stuff that humans will not consume.
So you've gone through this process of explaining how it works, and it's no longer, as you said, a kid making 22 bucks an hour putting these bikes together. It's more complex, and shipping costs have gone up exponentially. I don't think anybody debates that, but it's still what confuses me is why are these blown out as separate items to a consumer? Because any other product that you buy, as I stated earlier, you go in and there's the price. Why don't OEMs and dealers get together, work this out, whatever they have to come to, because we understand that things have to be shipped and that there's a fee, and that a motorcycle needs to be assembled and tested and fuel put in and the box disposed of, all stuff that takes time. To me, it seems like the most ridiculous, antiquated system to put these as separate costs, because are there any other products that you buy where these things are blown out, as a cost to put something on a shelf or to assemble it, and a cost to ship it? Like, just give us the price, the OEM price that they state. We don't need to know what a dealer pays for it. We don't care. Just what do we pay for it? Why is this system? It seems so ridiculous, and yet nobody seems to want to acknowledge that it's ridiculous.
Well, I think there's two answers to your question. And the first, that the OEMs don't want you to know or want you to think about, is that the freight has become what I refer to as a stealth price increase. And this really came out of the pandemic when we saw just an exponential increase in the speed in which that freight charge started going up. And, in some cases during 2001, 2002, we had vendors that raised their freight charges 3 or 4 times during the pandemic. And just like when
Were those legitimate increases, or were those just a way to get more money?
You'll have to, based on what I'm about to tell you, make that decision for yourself. You know, if you go back to the original gas crisis that we had, not the one in 1985, but the one that happened in, kind of, when was it? It was 2009, 2010, kind of during the Great Recession. We also had a large price increase then
Right.
on gas. And if you remember, at that point in time, UPS and FedEx added fuel surcharges. And even when gas prices in a period of time, in I forget what year it was, in the mid 15s, got down to a buck 20 or a buck 30 a gallon, we still paid that fuel surcharge on every item that we had that UPS and FedEx shipped. Once those charges come, they never go away. We've
Yeah.
never, ever, ever seen these prices drop. And so they increased during the pandemic. They're where they're at. And in fact, even as if you look at TEU container shipments across the world from China and Japan, I mean, yeah, they're up a little bit today because of the little skirmish that's going on in Iran, and their favorite strait, the Hormuz Strait. Um, they will come back down because there's a lot of competition for global shipping with Maersk and all these other companies. But when after the pandemic, those costs came back down to where they had historically been. In fact, they dropped a little bit lower then. We didn't see a reduction in freight cost. And, freight is not just freight. There's also the human equation that goes into that. There's people cost and there's insurance and there's all these other things. So we call it freight. It's a consolidation of a lot of different costs. But it it didn't come back down. And so do I think that without some of the things that we're working on today, are these costs ever going to come back down? Probably not. And so I go back to my statement about these being a stealth price increase, is that the market for selling products is competitive. And every manufacturer has an MSRP listed on their website. And then below that, most of them have a small plus freight and, tiny subscript. And I think a lot of the manufacturers know that freight is something that a lot of dealers negotiate on now. Now we don't. Whatever we're charged, that's what we charge the customer. It's different across the country. We can talk about that later if we have time. But they know that a lot of dealers negotiate on that number, and there are still a very small number of dealers who just suck it up and absorb it. Um, I don't know financially how that really makes sense, but there are a small number of dealers who do that. And so the manufacturers have had the ability to say, well, we want our MSRP to be competitive in the marketplace. We need to make more money on the products we're selling. So we'll increase the freight charge, knowing that the dealer is going to absorb some of that. So that's where we're at today with these freight charges continuing to increase. Just like Visa and MasterCard. When Visa and MasterCard are like, okay, our stockholders are getting a little bit nervous, they need to make a little bit more money, and they just turn up the interchange dial a little bit, and now they're making another $4 or $5 billion a year on a fractional percentage increase on what they bill dealers to accept credit cards. And that's where we're at with these freight charges.
So,
Now,
so it's kind of freight in quotation marks.
yeah,
It's not just because I've always thought of freight as just a simple number, but it's a number that's used by either side almost as a negotiating tactic.
it
If
can be, yes.
yes, so it's not that simple. But again, back to my question, and sorry to keep hammering away on this, but
No,
but but if
I
I
want
buy
to, I want to get it out there because there is a solution, and that I think everybody wins on this.
okay,
But
but okay, I'll let you get to that in a second. But what about the okay? Motorcycle's a large item and it's expensive to ship, but so is a refrigerator. But does a refrigerator doesn't have a separate shipping cost? And maybe this is a question that's impossible to answer. But why is it that vehicles do this? Now I know they're large, and why isn't that other household products, for instance, a fridge, How come they never got how come the shipping never became something that was a point of negotiation between a manufacturer and a seller?
I think because you had way more competition. You had, a lot of not only companies who played in that sandbox, but you also had a lot of manufacturers who were building products. And, in the end, those products got down to, a very competitive position. And, the other issue that we have in power sports, and the reason that we're where we're at today is because what I said earlier, you know, the manufacturers are going, well, we don't want to be first. And nobody wants to do this. And all of a sudden, there's going to be two pain points for the manufacturer. One, if they were the only one to do it and include freight and include a setup reimbursement in MSRP, that MSRP is going to go up. There's no debating that.
Oh, hang on a
But
second. The simple fact that BMW, for instance, which is the only one, as you said,
mhm,
the simple fact that they're including that is going to raise the price?
well, with BMW, it's not because they're already there. But if
Okay,
you think of
I think I misunderstood you. Sorry.
yeah, if you think about take Kawasaki. Today, if you go and look at a Kawasaki on their website, and let's say that you're looking at one that's got an 87.99 retail price plus 675 freight, your new MSRP potentially is going to be
Oh, okay.
9,500.
I thought okay, sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought just by including it, they were gonna add another little cushion in there just to make a little
No,
more money.
well, I personally, what I think, if we can move the industry in the direction we want to move the industry, is that I think that the manufacturers are possibly, because it's going to be more competition, are going to have to take that cushion out of the freight cost. I actually think that potentially we could reduce these prices a little bit because now that ability for the manufacturers to have this stealth price increase has gone away. And so, what we really want is we want all of the manufacturers for
And
the 20.
this is the white paper you're talking about now.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so what we have proposed is that for the 2027 model year is that every manufacturer move to an inclusive MSRP. And that MSRP has got freight built into it. It's got a setup or PDI or build reimbursement for the dealer built into it. And we just get everybody to that point. And so now when you are as a consumer are going and looking online and you want to buy a vehicle, you are comparing MSRP between 10 or 20 dealers and you're seeing the number that you're actually going to pay. And, I give you a great example on this, and I was kind of pissed off that it happened this way. But, I had a good friend of mine bought a bunch of vehicles from me. And this is 5 or 6 years ago. His son graduates from college and he wants to buy him a new bike and he wants to buy him an R1. And so he called me up and said, will you sell me this bike? And I said, sure. And I'll make you a good deal on it. So I made him a good offer. And a couple days later, he calls me back or sends me a text and he goes, am I really getting a good deal? Because the dealer to the north of you by 60 miles is telling me that they're going to sell me that same bike for $1,500 cheaper. And I said, I'm just going to, I was pissed off that he shot me on the deal, but not so pissed off that I told him to go F himself. But I said, you're not comparing apples to apples. I said, I know how that dealer operates. I know how that organization operates. And there's only one number that matters to you, and that's the out the door price. And I said, you're going to struggle to get it from them, but push your salesperson to give you an out the door price. And when he finally got that out the door price, he was $2,000 more than I was going to sell the bike to him for, out the door, tax title license and everything included. Yeah, they were $1,500 cheaper on the selling price, but they had massively inflated the freight charge. They were going to charge them $2,500 in freight for something that cost
I
them
see.
probably at
I
that point in
see.
time $550, and they were going to charge them $500 or $600 in setup. So we want to eliminate that, and you know, will it make the industry more competitive? Yes, because these games go on today, and again, I'm in the industry. I'm being honest with everybody here. I'm sure there'll be some nice commentary to this podcast. I don't like it, but as a dealer, if I were to be the only one who was on my website to just say, here's the single price that you're going to pay that includes freight and setup, and consumers are going to Cycle Trader or whatever resource they utilize to shop vehicles, and we're $2,000 more than everybody else on their selling price, we're not going to get much business. We're not going to get many leads. We're not even going to get that customer is going to come in and talk to us, and we're going to explain to them there's only one number that you need to be concerned about, and that's the out the door price. And yeah, I know everybody else is advertising cheaper than us, but when you're all said and done, it's going to be more. So that's where we want the industry to move to, and the industry is not happy with this. The manufacturers are pushing back against it, but as a national organization with a decent representation in the industry, we have, as of Thursday, we've reached out to every CEO of every manufacturer and presented them a piece of paper that says, "Here's what we want. Here's what we expect." And we would like to hear back from you in a week. And if we don't, we're going to start reaching out to every dealership in the country, giving them copies of this template and saying, send registered letters to your manufacturers stating that this is what we as dealerships want. We've heard back from 5 of the manufacturers so far. So I feel like we're making progress. And, there's been kind of this, I think, splitting the cost is that the manufacturers said, "Yeah, we think we're pretty open to this freight thing. We're not too too inclined to do the setup reimbursement." And we've essentially come back and said, "No, that doesn't get us to where we need to be."
So
So,
can you name names? The 5 that you sent them out to? Have you had any
well,
accept?
we've reached out to every manufacturer. I can tell you the ones who have responded at this point in time. We've heard back from Polaris. We've heard back from BRP. We've heard back from Triumph. Have been 3 that have come back and said, "Yeah, we are willing to talk and discuss this." So we haven't heard back from everybody at this point in time, and so we'll kind of see how things play out. There is in the industry, and this gets to be a little bit confusing. There is an organization called the MIC. In Canada, you have Moto Canada, which is kind of similar but operates a little bit differently. In the US, we have what's called the MIC, which is the Motorcycle Industry Council. The key thing about the MIC is that they are a manufacturer organization. They do not represent the dealers. The NPDA represents the dealers in the US. Dealers don't have any other representation. And so the MIC has a board meeting on June 8th, and we know that this topic has made it onto the agenda for that meeting. And so I think that that's kind of the point in time where we're either going to get back some positive news or we're going to get back something that says that they want to slow walk this, which for us is not going to be where I don't think we're going to accept that. Or they could just say, no, we're not going to do it. We want to keep operating the way that we're operating, which I don't think is good for anybody.
Hearing you talk about this, it's kind of head scratching because rightly or wrongly, pretty much everybody, every motorcyclist that I know, including myself, you kind of have a dealership horror story.
I get it. I've had them too.
And so it seems like this whole business model, between the dealers and between the OEMs, my God, people do something, and I know this is what you're trying to do, like, do something to help yourself. It's the most going into a dealer, my God, you put anything, if you want a lot of comments on it, and if you write for a website like ADV Writer, mention something about a dealer experience. And then everybody lists all the issues that have come up. Um, Including your friend who was given this sweetheart of a price for an R1, which was no sweetheart of a price at all. I mean, it's like they're screwing everybody, not every dealer, not every OEM, just to be clear. But I mean, there are these cases where do they not think that they will ever be a repeat customer? Do they not think that this person who thought they were getting a great deal on something and all of a sudden, ends up overpaying? Do they not think they're going to tell their friends? It's like an um, immature industry almost when you listen to it. It's like, and yet motorcycles have been around a while. Like, why is this still operating in such an absurd way where it's like snake oil salesmen? I mean, these are like, it's like the county fair in 1925, rub this on your elbow, it'll cure, gout. It's just like, that's a bit of a stretch. But like, why can't this just be so much more simpler and direct? I mean, the customer would benefit. I would think the OEM would benefit. I mean, who benefits from this existing program the way it is now, except in the most superficial way? Okay, you make a few extra bucks on a bike, but ultimately, is it not damaging? I mean, it just seems absurd to me.
Y- you know,
Am I wrong?
no, you're perfectly right. I'll kind of give you, at least a little bit of what I consider to be insight. Um, you've got this situation where a lot of consumers think that, and I've asked a lot of people, I'm just being honest when we're in certain negotiations on vehicles, and let's say that I've got an ATV that retails for $8,000, and you ask a lot of consumers, what do you think I paid for that? And a lot of consumers think that the dealer paid $4,000 or $5,000 for that. The reality is that $8,000 ATV probably had a cost on it outside of the freight and setup of probably somewhere around seven to $7,100. Because of this freight billing and the way things work, I actually have products that we sell on the floor today that the price that I paid the manufacturer is more than the MSRP. And that sounds insane, but it's because of you've got this margin between cost and retail, and then when the manufacturer adds in the freight charge, that freight charge is more than the margin we make on the product, and so now invoice ends up being more than MSRP. If you don't charge the freight, if you don't charge setup, you would lose money on that sale. I mean, a great example, I'll probably get dinged for saying this, but on a Kawasaki Ninja 500, on the price sheet that we have from Kawasaki, the difference between what the check that I write Kawasaki for that bike and MSRP is about $160.
Right.
So without getting the reimbursement of the 675 freight, without making a little bit of money for setup, to sell that bike and make $160, I can't pay a salesperson. That doesn't cover my insurance. It doesn't cover the overhead of the store. So there is, I think, in the industry, there is a little bit of a disconnect. It's consumers in a lot of cases see that, JCPenney has a 40% or 50% off sale. They had that product made, they bought it in. There's no middleman in it. There's not a lot of competition. And so they can do that. And JCPenney can offer 50%, or Target can offer 50% off on something and still make money on it.
Because there's 100% markup.
Yeah, they're keystones. So,
Yeah.
we don't have that. So I think there is a little bit of a disconnect with consumers, but there's also this major dealership problem, and I talk to dealers about this all the time. They're frustrated that this department is fighting with that department, and why can't everybody just work together? And I always ask them the same question. I'm like, does your pay plans, do they promote unity of the team? And I think about it for a minute. And they're like, well, I pay the salesperson commission on selling the bike. He doesn't care about parts and service. I pay the technicians, a commission on the labor they do. They don't care what happens in the rest of the store. And so you've always got this combative nature that exists in most dealerships. And a lot of dealerships, they might have their values written down on a piece of paper somewhere, and they say teamwork on them, or they say harmony, or they, say customer experience, but their pay plans promote something completely different from that. And so, how do you as a dealership, you know, when that customer buys that new vehicle and they have an issue with it a couple of weeks down the road, and they call their salesperson up and they're pissed off, and the salesperson says, well, you're going to have to bring it into service, and they're backed up a few days. I'll see what I can do to get you in. But they don't really have any control over what goes on in the service department, and the service department just sees that as that transaction, that this customer has got a problem, they're coming in with this. In a lot of cases, they're not thinking about, if we do a great job at taking care of this customer, that he lives near another dealership, but by taking care of this, we are going to earn his business. He's going to come back to us and get this bike serviced 6 months down the road and a year down the road.
Right.
And 2 years later, he's going to come in and buy a new motorcycle because he really likes the way that we took care of him. Love to say that we should operate like that, but very few dealers that do. I get asked, not as much anymore because my role in the industry has changed, but I talk about service a lot, and dealers are like, well, who has a good service department? And of the hundreds of dealers that I've worked with across the country, I only know 3 dealers that have a good service department.
And
And
what do you mean by and in this case, good meaning?
just a world class, in that the owner and the GM spend as much or more time in service as they do in the sales department.
Right.
And 80% of owners and GMs in the industry came up through finance or came up through sales. They don't know, they don't understand service and parts, and they don't that service and parts in your average dealership. The service department generates about 6% of your total revenues, and your parts department is somewhere between about 10 and 13% of total revenues. So it's a
And
small piece.
how much are sales? New
Uh,
sales.
s- sales is going to be the balance outside of finance. So, I mean, in a lot of stores, sales department is 75% of revenues. In some cases, I know some dealers who their sales department actually generates 85, 86% of the total company revenues. And so it's the lowest margin product that we sell, but it's also the biggest dollars. And so
But
it works.
that's overall. That's gross. That's
Gross,
not
not
profit.
correct.
Because on that $8,000 motorcycle, if you're making 160, it looks dramatic, but you're making very little money on it.
Yeah. So, all in, across the country today, I would say that if you're just talking about motorcycles and you kind of blend all the motorcycle dealers together, I mean, the profit margins on motorcycles today, your average dealer is probably around 11%. And so on a, $10,000 motorcycle, a dealer's making, $1,100, probably somewhere right in there. But to go back to, kind of finish what I was rambling about, is that there's just those 3 dealers who have this excellent service department. What do you think that does for them? What it actually does is their service customers are such so loyal and such big promoters of that operation, because it's so unique to have a very good service experience, that it drives their sales departments. And their sales departments not only outperform most of the other dealers that I know, but they also make one of the highest new vehicle margins because they're not negotiating
Right.
with the customer goes to them because he wants to do business with them. It's not, what happens in a lot of cases, you get a customer that walks in, average dealership, and what does the salesperson say? "Ah, we're gonna take great care of you in service." That's a lie. The Google reviews prove it. And yet, these dealers who, when the salespeople know that they've got a world-class service department that's backing them, they can say that with truth and honesty. And it's not only the salesperson that's saying it, it's the dealer's Google reviews, it's the other customers who have bought from them, and just it's magical to see it happen, but it's also like a unicorn. I mean, it's just it very rarely do you ever stumble across one.
I mean, based on what you've been saying, I'm going to give you an outline for a dealership model. Now, part of the problem, of course, is that we as humans, we see that 99.99 price and someone else is 11,250, and I do not exclude myself. We dive on the cheap price, even though we know that it may not be the out the door price. So here's my idea for a dealership. The prices are on the bikes. The prices are fair. There's no chicanery going on. You have a great service department. You're not negotiating for every little, $25 here and $50 there. You're making a sensible profit. You're making your 11% or whatever, on a bike, and you just run it like a straight ahead business. Is that going to be, is that a guarantee for success? Or is your customer, is a guy like me, going to see that bike on Cycle Trader, and are we going to go, it's cheaper if we go to Maryland? Who's going to be success? Is that dealer going to hit it out of the park?
I would say that that dealer is probably gonna have a going out of business sign on their door pretty quickly. Um,
Now that's a sad reflection, isn't it?
yeah, but I mean, it is the reality of the country that we live in. It's, not to get into politics, but, you know, the majority of the product that the you know, this cup and, this most fin that I buy, I mean, all this stuff comes from China. And, why do we buy it from China? Because it's cheap. And even though it's shipped around the world and it's in some cases probably made by a 11-year-old kid working 18 hours a day, we buy it because it's cheap. And when you talk to Americans and you ask them, you know, would you want made in America product? They always say yes. But
They won't
there's a
they will
caveat.
not pay for it, yeah.
Yeah, there's a caveat to it in that, yes, but I wanted a Chinese pricing. And when their cost of labor is a couple of bucks an hour and our cost of labor is $28 an hour, we can't make this for $5. I mean, this is a promotional company that provides our DMS, this promotional cup. I mean, they probably got these for 6 or 7 bucks a piece engraved with their logo on them. This was made in America and engraved by Americans. They'd be 35 bucks a piece. Americans are not gonna pay for that, and so there's this big disconnect that I I don't know how you square that. And it's Harley Davidson is dealing with the same problem right now, is that they want to have, they wanna have an affordable bike. They came out with the 500 and 750 Nightsters, were made in India. They were cheap. Dealers didn't like them. Consumers didn't like them, and they got discontinued. They're gonna come out with this new $6,000 motorcycle in, the next 6 months. We've already pulled dealers on it, and dealers are not behind that bike, and so it'll fill up they'll sell a bunch initially, it'll fill up their rider school. They'll retail a few, but it's not gonna make a difference to what's going on in the industry.
So the problem really is not the OEM, it's not the dealership. The problem is us, is humanity. Mark, no, I'm distressed. It's humanity has failed again because we're so ridiculous. We just won't accept that a dealership has to make a certain amount of profit and the service department has to make a certain amount of profit. I mean, there must be something ingrained with us. It must be from our hunter-gatherer days that we're trying to get a bigger we're just trying to get a bigger hunk of meat without risking our neck getting it.
You you know, I'll give you a couple of things to mull over, and things have been distorted ever since the pandemic. They'll level back out at some point down the road. Prior to the pandemic in 2019, the average, talking the average of all the 4,000 to 5,000 dealers that exist in the country, the average power sports dealership did about $16 million in revenues. I think it was 15.6 that year. I could go back and look at my notes. So 16 million bucks. The average power sports dealership netted about 2.8% that year. So take 3% of 16 million, 500,000 bucks. So, you've got a big investment in property, in the business, in all the costs. And, you've got an owner who's taken, a wage out of that. But I'm not talking about the dealers who do outsized or undersized wages. But, it's a lot of work for not a lot of return. And a lot of people who are in the industry do it because they like being in the industry, just like me. I've been in this industry for more than 30 years at this point in time. It's been great to me and my wife and our three cats. Um, it's uh, I wouldn't getting the opportunity to do it all over again. I wouldn't do it any differently. But you talk about what would this perfect dealership look like? The reality is that their volume would be low because they probably wouldn't be able to attract the talent that they need on the sales floor to drive outsized sales. I mean, that 3.2% would be whittled away pretty quickly to nothing, and they just wouldn't survive. And I don't
So
I don't
so
love it.
so yeah, so I mean, so really, everyone goes on and complains,
Mm.
in the comment section about dealers, but it is an animal that we the citizenry perpetuate, don't we?
I think we give outsized voice to the people who complain. And we also, you know this as well as I do, that that person who is online talking about, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and this and that. And then when they're in your face, they're like, yes, sir, no, sir. Thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
But I think we give outsized exposure to some of those individuals. And the reality is, our dealership, we're not perfect. But I can tell you that when I go back and spend a week there every 3 months, a lot of times I'll put something out on Facebook, a photo at the dealership, and just say, hey, I'm back. I'm glad to be back. And I like it. And out of the woodwork, I have people that show up that just, hey, saw you're in town, just wanted to come by and say hi. And we've got customers who are at the store every week, even if they're not buying anything, to come and check out the new bikes and drink some coffee and eat some freshly made popcorn. And we've got our our receptionist does a great job at making popcorn. I don't know how she does it, but it's really, really good. And I've eaten way more than my fair share of it. But, we've got lots of customers who come back and return because they like the environment and they like what we do. And I've got lots of customers who have bought more than 20 vehicles from me over the years. So, have there been some customers who have had a bad experience? Have we got sideways with people? Oh, hell yeah! We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to make everybody happy. I will tell you that I have this theory, and it's called the black cloud customer. And I've talked to these people over the years, and there's one guy that comes to name, and comes to mind, and I'm not going to use his name. But I talked to this guy. He bought a Yamaha Rhino, and a year after he had it, the cylinder developed a crack in it, and it was burning oil and smoking. And it was a tough problem for us to figure out. Sounds easy, but it required a little bit of work. And his vehicle's in service for too long, and there were some back order situations, and it took us a while to get the parts. And I'm talking to this guy, and he starts telling me about all the things that have gone wrong in his life. And the new truck that he bought 2 years earlier, he leaves the dealership and he's driving down the road and a rod falls through the bottom of the motor. And he bought this house and he'd been in there for 2 weeks and the water heater in the ceiling, wherever it was, had busted and done $100,000 in damage. And this guy, in 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 letting him vent on me for 30 minutes, I've never heard anybody that's had so many things that have gone wrong to one individual. But I truly believe that he had, it was like the Truman Show.
Right.
I believe that he had a cloud that followed him around, that rained and lightninged and did everything that it could to ruin his life. And, hopefully there's not too many black cloud customers out there, but there's just some people that trouble seems to follow them around. And that's unfortunate. And we've sold our fair share of vehicles over the years where somebody had a weird or unique problem. And it sucks, but it it we're not Walmart. When you buy a new vehicle and you have a problem with it a month down the road, that vehicle's titled, it's registered, and it's not that you can just bring it back and say, "Give me another one."
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we unfortunately we have one solution to that problem, and that is to fix it and try to do our best to make it right. And it that customer is probably never gonna be happy with us again. Maybe they leave the community and they don't ever buy another motorcycle again, or maybe they go down the road and they buy something from them and they talk bad about us. Was that really our
Yeah.
doing? No, but could we have handled the situation better? Probably, but it's the reality of the world we live in.
Mark, let's leave it there. We haven't solved the world's problems, but you've been very gracious with your time in explaining this, and it still baffles me, I gotta say. But at least I understand why it baffles me. And just to finish up, so BMW is on board, and will you come back again and tell me how what the shakedown is after the white paper has been out for a little while?
Yeah, yeah, let's do it. So, and if you as a consumer are, talking to your dealer and you don't like the way that things currently operate, then tell your local dealer to support the NPDA and to support our white paper. You can find it online. You can read exactly what we're asking for and help us to move the industry to a better place. Like I said earlier, this truly is one of those few things where everybody who's involved will be a winner. Um, and I think the industry will be in a lot better place on the backside of this than the front side. But it's going to require that everybody keep pushing in the right direction.
Thank you again for listening to the Lowdown Radio Show, which I will remind you is presented by advrider.com.